She was a single mother. He was a millionaire CEO living in silence, and a little girl brought them together with one question that changed everything. "Sir, would you like to have Christmas dinner with me and my mommy?" Subscribe now. And don't miss the healing story we all deserve to hear. Chicago, Christmas Eve. Snow was falling in thick, steady silence, as if the sky was trying to cover everything too broken to fix. Streetlights blinked through the haze along Ashland Avenue, glowing amber against the icy sidewalks of West Loop. And on a cold bench in Union Park sat a man who looked like he had never been cold before. Ethan Carter, 34, founder and CEO of Lighthouse Technologies. His coat was tailored Italian wool, his leather shoes hand-polished. Everything about him whispered control, precision, status. But his posture told a different story, of someone who hadn't truly been present in his own life for a long time. He had skipped the holiday gala that bore his name, the one with champagne towers, a live jazz trio, and toasts written by PR teams. Instead, he had wandered here, to a city park dusted in snow, seeking something that didn't have a name. Above the bench, carved into granite, read the words, "To those who gave their lives in silence." Somehow, it fit. Ethan sat motionless, watching people rush past with gift bags and peppermint lattes, their laughter muffled by scarves. Their world didn't include him anymore. He no longer felt part of it. Not since the accident that took Amelia, his fiancée, his anchor. A private jet crash, mechanical failure, his company's jet, his decision. 18 months later, no boardroom triumph, no business magazine cover could fill that hollow. He hadn't spoken to his parents in years. His condo downtown felt more like a luxury showroom than a home. He closed his eyes. Then, a voice, small but clear. "Excuse me, would you like to have dinner with us?" He opened his eyes. There, standing just in front of him, was a little girl, maybe 4 years old, chestnut curls peeking out of a knit hat, cheeks flushed pink, eyes wide and solemn beneath long lashes. Her gloves were mismatched. One had a hole in the thumb. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't begging. She was simply inviting. "My mom says we have enough for 3 plates. You can have one. It's not turkey or anything, but there's mashed potatoes." Ethan blinked. He could recite merger projections on national TV, handle litigation threats mid-flight. But here, facing a child in a puffy red coat offering him dinner, he found no words. She tilted her head and added, "I'm Lily. You look like someone who doesn't have anybody. Mommy says when you see someone like that, you share." She held out her mittened hand. Ethan stared at it. Tiny, worn, brave. And then, he stood. They walked together through the quieting streets, Lily skipping beside him, narrating the journey like a tour guide. She told him about the neighbor's dog named Button, how she once tried to eat a pine cone because it looked like a Christmas treat, and how her mom said eating carrots would make her hair grow princess long. Ethan didn't say much, but something in the way her little fingers clung to his hand, like she already trusted him, made it impossible to let go. They turned off the main road toward a narrow brick building with a hand-painted sign. Chicago Family Health Outreach. Below was a modest clinic. Above it, their home. On the steps, a woman was adjusting her scarf, slim, with tired eyes and a calm kind of beauty. She spotted them and froze. She had the same hair as Lily, the same guarded expression. A medical badge peeked from under her coat. Grace Thompson, RN. "Mommy!" Lily shouted. "This is the man! He looked sad, so I brought him." Grace's gaze moved from her daughter to the stranger beside her. Ethan opened his mouth to explain, but she only said, "Come inside. It's freezing." The apartment was small, just above the clinic. One open space doubled as kitchen and living room. A plastic Christmas tree leaned in the corner, decorated with crayon drawings and paper stars. The air smelled like roast chicken and something warm, almost like nutmeg. 3 plates were set on the table. Grace said nothing at first, just added a serving to a 3rd plate and placed it gently before him. "It's not much," she said quietly, "but it's real." They ate in near silence. Lily chattered between bites. Grace offered him water without asking. Ethan listened to the fork clinks, the child's laughter, the way the room felt full, somehow. There were no silver candle holders or curated centerpieces, but for the first time in years, Ethan's appetite returned, not for food, but for connection. After dinner, Grace made tea. She moved efficiently, like someone used to having little and making it enough. She didn't ask questions, didn't press him for explanations. Ethan sat back, taking in the room. A faded couch, a worn bookshelf, Lily's boots placed neatly by the heater. Everything in this space had a purpose. Nothing here was performative. He looked toward the corner of the table. A wooden chair with a crooked leg sat slightly apart from the rest. "That one was for my dad," Grace said softly, following his gaze. "He passed away before Lily was born. She still insists we set it every Christmas." Ethan didn't respond, but something deep within him stirred. When it was time to leave, Grace stood at the door. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, her head resting against a teddy bear in a Santa hat. Grace didn't offer a number, didn't ask his name. She just said, "Thank you for not being afraid to say yes." He looked at her. The snow danced in the porch light behind her. "I didn't know I said yes," he replied honestly. She smiled, a small, tired smile. And then she closed the door. The next morning, Chicago wore its silence like a wool coat. The wind had softened, but the snow still blanketed everything. Roofs, fire escapes, even the crooked mailbox outside the red brick building where Grace Thompson lived with her daughter. On the 2nd floor, above a modest community clinic, the scent of cinnamon oatmeal wafted through a narrow apartment. Ethan Carter stood just inside the doorway, unsure why he had come back. He hadn't called. He hadn't planned it. But at some point between midnight and dawn, the image of Lily's little gloved hand tugging at his own had pulled him back like a thread. And now, here he was, with a bag of pastries from a bakery he hadn't stepped into in years, standing in the hallway of a place that smelled like real life. Grace opened the door without surprise. She didn't smile, didn't ask why he was there, just stepped aside. "You brought the snow in with you," she said dryly, pointing to the trail of slush from his boots. Ethan mumbled an apology, brushing off his coat. He had prepared a sentence in his head on the walk over, something like, "I just wanted to say thank you," or maybe, "I forgot what kindness feels like." But none of it made it past his throat. Grace took the bag from him wordlessly and moved toward the kitchen counter. Lily peeked her head out from the bathroom, toothbrush still in her mouth. "Mr. Ethan," she grinned, foam around her lips. "Did you come to eat oatmeal with us? It's the lumpy kind." He chuckled. "That's my favorite kind," he said, and realized it wasn't a lie. The apartment, in daylight, looked even smaller than it had the night before. But it was the kind of small that felt lived in, not constricting. There was a stack of patient intake forms on the counter beside a battered first aid kit. A pair of worn tennis shoes sat beneath a coat rack built from pipes. The walls bore more of Lily's art. Stick figures holding balloons, a sun with sunglasses, a scribbled version of what Ethan assumed was a cat. "That one's me," Lily announced, pointing to the cat. "Mommy says I scratch when I'm tired." Grace raised an eyebrow over her teacup. "She does." Ethan laughed, genuinely, audibly, for what felt like the first time in over a year. They sat down at the tiny table, Ethan on the same wooden chair as last night. It wobbled slightly. Lily swung her legs, humming a Christmas song between bites. Grace poured him tea, not the curated kind served in boardrooms, just something from a box labeled store-brand herbal. "You're back early for someone who doesn't believe in Christmas," she said, not unkindly. Ethan looked into his cup. "Maybe I just didn't believe in the right version of it." A long silence stretched between them. Grace didn't pry. She never did. But after Lily had been distracted by her toy blocks in the corner, Grace finally asked the question that had been simmering since last night. "Why were you really sitting alone in the park on Christmas Eve?" Ethan didn't answer at first. He traced the rim of his mug. "Because I couldn't pretend anymore." He paused. "My company throws a black tie gala every December. Speeches, donation checks, influencer reels. They raise money for children's literacy. It looks beautiful on the outside, but—" He stopped. Grace didn't rush him. "My fiancé died in a crash last year, a small jet I signed off on. Engine failure, mechanical negligence. Lawsuit said it wasn't my fault, but—" He inhaled sharply. "She's still gone. And the world just kept spinning." Grace's eyes softened. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." Instead, she said, "You look like someone who forgot what it feels like to be needed." The words hit deeper than he expected. "I don't think anyone's needed me in a long time," he whispered. "Not for who I am, only for what I can fix." Lily returned with a box of bandages. "Mommy helps people who cry in their knees," she declared. "And in their hearts, too." Grace raised a brow. "I told you not to take those from the clinic storage." "But what if Mr. Ethan has a heart knee?" There was a beat of silence, then both adults laughed. It was awkward, and then beautiful. Grace walked him downstairs to the clinic later that morning. It had 6 folding chairs, a single examination table, and a wall calendar still flipped to November. A handwritten sign above the desk read, "Pay what you can, no one is turned away." Ethan glanced around the room. Something tugged at his chest. "You run this place?" "Sort of," Grace said, tightening her cardigan sleeves. "I'm a nurse by license. Studied pediatric medicine before Lily. Then my parents cut me off. I finished community college, applied for residencies, but they don't take single moms working 2 jobs, so here I am." "You could have done anything," he said. "I'm still trying." She looked toward a crayon drawing pinned above the receptionist's desk. It showed a school bus, a stethoscope, and a smiling sun. On top, in Lily's handwriting, it read, "Mommy's Dream Clinic." Ethan asked softly, "What is it?" Grace exhaled. "When I was in school, I dreamed of opening a mobile medical clinic, one that goes to orphanages and shelters. Kids who fall through the cracks get overlooked. I wanted to give them routine checkups, vaccinations, education, for free, consistently. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. But that kind of dream doesn't happen when you're a single mom sharing laundry machines with 4 other tenants. Ethan stared at her. He didn't speak. He just nodded, slowly, thoughtfully, and let the silence say what he couldn't. Before he left that afternoon, Lily handed him something folded from bright green construction paper, a lopsided star. "You forgot your tree last night," she said solemnly. "So now you have one." Ethan took it in his gloved hands and felt something shift inside. "Thank you," he said. "It's perfect." She grinned and pointed. "Put it somewhere where you can see it when you forget how to smile." He nodded, blinking faster than the wind warranted. "I will." The next time Ethan visited, he brought a light bulb and a wrench. The kitchen light in Grace's apartment had been flickering, not enough to cause real inconvenience, but enough to be noticeable in the evenings when shadows stretched long over the chipped linoleum. Ethan had noticed it 2 nights ago when Grace was reading Lily a bedtime story, the light pulsing faintly above them like a tired heartbeat. Grace had tried to wave it off. "It's fine. We're used to small glitches." But Ethan had returned 2 days later with a replacement bulb, a stepladder, and that quiet determination of someone who wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore, just trying to be useful. She watched him change it in near silence, standing near the doorway, arms crossed. There was a new tension in the air she hadn't let him see before. "You don't have to keep fixing things, you know," she said after he stepped down and folded the ladder. "I know," Ethan replied simply. "I want to." He meant it, but Grace didn't smile. Instead, she asked carefully, "Your last name? It's Carter, right?" Ethan nodded, wiping his hands on a towel. "Ethan Carter." She paused. "Lighthouse Technologies?" He looked up. There was no recognition in his face, just the slow realization of someone remembering the weight behind a name he hadn't said aloud in months. Grace's voice was calm, but something inside it had gone cold. "You're the reason we almost shut down last year." Ethan froze. "Excuse me?" Grace stepped forward, arms still crossed, but her jaw tight. "Lighthouse pulled its funding from every nonprofit medical program in the Midwest, mid-quarter with no warning. We were supposed to receive an equipment grant. It vanished. That grant was going to cover vaccinations for kids in the foster system. I fought to keep this clinic open with duct tape and favors." She didn't raise her voice. That made it worse. "We couldn't afford to hire a second nurse, which is why I work here 6 days a week on contract instead of finishing my license renewal. Why Lily sleeps in a coat when the heater stalls. Why half my patients now wait 3 months for blood work because we lost access to the shared lab program." Ethan's lips parted, but nothing came out. He hadn't known. He should have. When Lighthouse restructured its community programs a year ago, he had signed off on a strategic refocus memo prepared by the finance team. It had cut off peripheral grants to non-tech initiatives, including several underfunded health efforts. To him, at the time, it had been a spreadsheet line item. To Grace, it had been everything. "You didn't even send a call," she said. "Just silence, like we didn't exist." Ethan sat down at the edge of the couch, the weight of her words heavy on his shoulders. He looked up at her. "I didn't know," he said, voice rough. Grace let out a breath, not in anger, in fatigue. "You didn't care to." Lily peeked her head out from the hallway. She was wearing a crown made of cardboard and glitter glue. "Mr. Ethan, are you staying for soup night?" she asked hopefully. Grace knelt down, gently touched her daughter's shoulder. "Why don't you pick a book first, sweetheart?" Lily ran off without suspicion. Grace straightened. "You're good with her," she said. "But that doesn't make this less complicated." "I know," Ethan said quietly. "I don't want to explain to her why you stopped showing up." His face stiffened. "Is that what you're asking me to do?" She shook her head. "No. I'm saying if you want to keep coming around, you need to show up as more than a man with light bulbs and bakery bags. I need to know who you are when something breaks that you can't fix." Ethan stood slowly. "I didn't come here to hide. I came here because I was tired of hiding everywhere else." Grace studied him. Her expression was still guarded, but something inside her shifted. "Then don't make me regret letting Lily open the door." The next morning, Ethan returned. Not with gifts, not with excuses, but with a file folder. Inside it was a list of every community health program Lighthouse had defunded, with handwritten notes beside each one. He had stayed up all night gathering it. Each note marked, "Find new support." "Reassess viability." "Reinstate with oversight." He handed it to Grace. "I won't pretend this fixes what's already done," he said, "but I can change what happens next, if you'll let me learn from this the right way." Grace looked at the folder. "You really read all of this?" "Twice," he replied. "And I want you to be the one who tells me what matters." They didn't talk more that day. But when he left, Grace didn't close the door right away. She stood at the frame, watching him walk into the snow, her fingers resting on the wood like she wasn't sure if she should call him back or not. Inside, Lily was drawing again. Another Christmas tree, but this time with 3 figures beneath it instead of 2. She labeled them in shaky block letters. Me, Mommy, Mr. Ethan. It was the 3rd time that week Ethan found himself climbing the narrow staircase above the clinic. And he didn't even bother pretending he had a reason. No light bulbs, no bakery bags, just the need to be there. Grace opened the door in scrubs, her stethoscope still slung over one shoulder. Her eyes looked tired, not just from the day, but from a life built on constantly showing up without backup. Still, she stepped aside. Ethan entered with a quiet nod. "Rough shift?" he asked. 4 kids with RSV, 1 grandmother who refused antibiotics because her cousin's neighbor had a rash once, and someone's teenage brother who thinks Mountain Dew counts as hydration, she muttered. He raised an eyebrow. "That's oddly specific." "Welcome to public health." She disappeared into the kitchen. The smell of ginger and honey followed. They sat across from each other at the small table. No Lily tonight. She was already asleep, curled on the couch, hugging a pillow shaped like a snowman. Her soft breathing gave the apartment a rhythm. Outside, the city blurred into falling snow, and the world narrowed down to a cup of tea and 2 people learning to be real again. Grace poured the tea slowly. She didn't offer sugar. Ethan didn't ask for any. "You know," she began, "when I first found out I was pregnant with Lily, I was 19 and halfway through my clinical rotations." Ethan looked up. Grace was staring into her cup, her voice soft but unwavering. "The guy I was dating was older, handsome, charismatic. He said all the things lonely girls believe when they're trying to outrun silence. When I told him I was pregnant, he said he needed to process. Then he blocked my number." Ethan's grip on the mug tightened, but he said nothing. I told my parents. They said I was throwing away my future. My dad called it unforgivable. Said if I was keeping the baby, I'd do it alone. She exhaled through her nose. No tears, no shaking voice, just the kind of quiet that comes from reliving something too many times to still cry over it. I moved into a rented room behind a laundromat in Bronzeville. Took classes online, got certified, waitressed, cleaned floors, anything to stay afloat. She looked at him. I didn't do it to be noble. I did it because no one else would show up for her. Gee, Ethan didn't speak for a long time. He just looked at her. Really looked, like he hadn't before. And then, in a voice rougher than expected, he said, I was supposed to be married last spring. Grace's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. Her name was Amelia. She was a trauma surgeon. Brilliant. Terrifyingly honest. She hated yachts and gave away half her salary every December to clinics I didn't even know existed. His voice cracked. She took a company jet to Colorado for a conference. Engine failed on descent. The report said structural fatigue. I had signed the clearance 6 weeks earlier. Silence. Ethan didn't cry, but his eyes were glassed over, and his breath sounded thinner than before. I didn't go to the funeral. I couldn't. Her family didn't want me there. Neither did I. Grace didn't respond with words. She reached for the teapot, refilled his cup, then quietly placed a second napkin next to his, not offering comfort, not trying to fix, just being there. It was enough. After a long while, Grace broke the silence with a question he didn't expect. What did you want to be when you were a kid? Ethan blinked. Not rich, he said finally. She smiled, just a little. I wanted to be a traveling nurse for orphans, like the ones in the stories. Pack up a van with medical supplies, go from town to town. He looked at her, surprised. Seriously? I even designed the logo once, she said, chuckling under her breath. It was a sun with a Band-Aid in the middle. That's oddly beautiful. She shrugged. I guess I always thought healthcare should meet kids where they are, not where insurance says they should be. Her tone was joking, but something in it ached. I put it all in a binder once, my someday folder. I found it again when I was unpacking boxes after Lily was born. I kept it. Don't know why. Maybe to remind myself I wasn't always this tired. Ethan looked at her. This woman who served soup from cans, who worked overtime without asking for praise, who raised a daughter who invited lonely strangers to dinner. What would you do, he asked slowly, if that someday was possible again? Grace stared at him. It's not. But what if it were? She tilted her head, unsure if he was serious. Then I'd buy a second-hand van, pack it with equipment, and start with the kids no one tracks. The ones in group homes, underfunded shelters, halfway houses. I'd get their charts in one place, run checkups, treat them like they matter. Her voice dropped. I'd go back for the kid I was, who needed a doctor and got silence instead. The tea had gone cold by now, but neither of them noticed. There were no grand gestures that night, no offers of funding, no promises. Just two people, both once broken, finally finding ground steady enough to stand on together. As Ethan left, Grace walked him to the door, not as a guest, but as someone she expected to return. You okay walking in the snow? She asked. I think I need it. Need what? He smiled. The cold. It reminds me I'm not made of glass. She paused, studying him. No, you're made of something heavier than that, but maybe not unfixable. He looked at her. Neither are you. It started with construction paper. Lily had spent the better part of 2 afternoons cutting, gluing, and drawing on every scrap of red and green she could find. Stars, candy canes, a lopsided Santa with 3 arms. The hallway of the clinic above which she lived had become her personal art studio. She even made a handmade invitation, addressed to Mr. Ethan Carter, guest of honor. Inside, in her large, uneven handwriting, "Please come to my Christmas show. I will sing very loud. Mommy says I am brave. I want you to hear me be brave." Ethan held the card as though it were glass. He looked across the table at Grace, who simply shrugged. She wanted to ask you herself, but she said the note would last longer. "When is it?" he asked. "Friday at 6 o'clock. Community Church on Franklin and 12th, basement level. It's not Carnegie Hall," she said lightly, "but it's heated and there's cider." Ethan smiled, not politely, but deeply. "I'll be there," he said. "Front row." He meant it. But even as he said the words, his phone, which had been mercifully silent all week, began to buzz again. Voicemail, then a text, then a name. S. Madsen, board chair, Lighthouse. He didn't open the message, not yet. The week passed with strange joy. Ethan stopped bringing pastries and started showing up just to be there. He repaired the sink drain, installed a lock on the back door. Once, he took Lily to the park while Grace ran late clinic hours. She had emerged to find Lily fast asleep on his shoulder, and Ethan humming Silent Night without realizing. He never asked for thanks. He never gave advice. He simply stayed. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan Carter stopped being needed for power and began being wanted for presence. On Thursday night, as the snow came down in thick, quiet layers, they lost power. It was only for a few hours, but it turned the apartment into a different world, lit by 3 half-melted candles and a flashlight balanced in a mason jar. Grace heated soup on a gas burner. Lily danced in shadows on the wall. Ethan sat at the small table, watching the two of them like a man trying to memorize a dream he was afraid to wake from. "You ever think you were meant to be somewhere else?" he asked quietly. Grace looked up from stirring. "All the time," she said. "But maybe not someone else." He turned to her. "What do you mean?" She set the pot down, handed him a spoon. "I used to think if I just worked hard enough, I could become someone powerful. Someone with a voice in policy rooms. Someone who could make real changes." She blew on her spoon. "Now I think maybe the power is showing up for someone small. Someone like Lily. Or you." Ka. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a check. "This is for the clinic," he said, "to replace what Lighthouse took away, with no strings. I don't want a plaque or a press release." Grace stared at it. "Ethan." "And," he added, "if you'll let me, I want to help fund that mobile unit you dreamed of, the one with the sun and the Band-Aid." Grace blinked. Tears shimmered but didn't fall. "Why?" "Because I can, and because I've never wanted to be proud of my money until now." She didn't speak, but she reached across the table and touched his hand, and in that candlelit moment, they were no longer two people trying to survive. They were something closer to a beginning. Friday morning came with crisp skies and glittering sidewalks. Lily wore a puffy red coat and carried her music folder like it held the Constitution. Her excitement was contagious. She rehearsed her lines on the sidewalk, in the elevator, even while brushing her teeth. "I'm gonna sing so loud the roof flies off," she whispered to Ethan as they walked together. "I'll bring a helmet," he replied. Grace had laughed, the kind of laugh that made her tilt her head back. But at 4:12 p.m., everything cracked. Ethan's phone rang again. This time, he answered. "Carter," said a voice he hadn't heard in months. "Board meeting. Emergency vote. We need you downtown tonight." Tonight? Yes. 6:30 sharp. Shareholders are restless. They're bringing in outside counsel to freeze your override on community spending. If you're not here to counter, you lose control of the foundation arm, possibly the seat. Silence. "Ethan, you there?" "Yes." He looked at the clock. 4:14 p.m. The church was 20 minutes away. The meeting was 30 blocks in the opposite direction. "I have somewhere I promised to be." "Ethan, listen to me. This is your legacy. Your signatures on every major charter. If you're absent tonight, you lose all say in what gets saved and what gets cut. Permanently." His hand shook. He ended the call. Outside the clinic, Lily waited with a paper crown. "Ready?" she chirped. Ethan knelt down, brushing a hair from her forehead. "Lily, sweetheart, I might be a little late tonight." Her face fell. "But you promised." His heart split. "I know. Something urgent came up." She looked at him, not with anger, but with something worse, quiet disappointment. "Mommy says grown-ups always say that, but dinner still gets cold." He swallowed. Grace appeared behind her, watching everything unfold. She didn't say a word, but her eyes asked one question. "What kind of man are you when it costs something to stay?" Ethan stood, torn in two. But something inside him, the part of him that remembered Amelia's last flight, the part that still kept Lily's drawing in his pocket, made the decision before logic could. "You know what?" he said, crouching again. "I did promise, and I'm tired of breaking promises." He took Lily's hand. "Let's go sing that roof off." The morning after the Christmas recital, the headline was already out. "Carter absent in crucial vote. Board restructures Lighthouse Foundation." Beneath it, a blurry photo of Ethan exiting a brick church with a red-cheeked child on his shoulders, smiling as though the world hadn't just shifted beneath his feet. He read the article in silence. It described the boardroom coup in precise language. Shareholder confidence waning. Vote passed 6-3 to override Carter's philanthropic spending privileges. Foundation funds to be restructured under a new chair. And then one line, quiet and fatal. Effective immediately, Ethan Carter is removed from the Community Oversight Committee. He set the phone down. The loft apartment on Lakeshore felt cold that morning. Not because of the weather, but because it no longer felt like his. The place had always been too quiet, too clean, but now it felt foreign, like a museum of who he used to be, a life curated for prestige, not presence. He walked past the floor-to-ceiling windows, past the wine fridge he never used, and stood before the small wooden shelf he'd placed in the corner. The one with Lily's green paper star and her crayon drawing of "Me, Mommy, Mr. Ethan." They looked back at him, and somehow he didn't feel like he had lost. That afternoon, his assistant, Marlene, called. "They're asking for a statement," she said quietly, "about the vote, about you stepping down." "Stepping down?" he repeated. "That's what they're calling it?" "They need a narrative, Ethan. If you don't give them one, they'll write it for you." He sighed. "Then I'll write my own." By evening, he had recorded a short video. No script, no backdrop. Just him, sitting in the dim light of the same clinic hallway where Lily had drawn her stars. He looked directly into the camera. "I've spent my life in boardrooms, and for years, I believed that doing good was about numbers, optics, and scalable models. But last night, I sat in the front row of a basement Christmas show, and I watched a 4-year-old girl sing like her heart might burst because someone showed up like they said they would." He paused. "I missed a vote. I lost my seat. But I kept a promise. And for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm building something that matters." He ended with a simple sentence. "This isn't a resignation. It's a redirection." By the following morning, the video had gone viral. Not with investors, with nurses, with teachers, with foster parents, with single mothers who wrote things like, "I've never heard a CEO sound like a person before." It was messy. It was real. And it was human. Grace saw the video on her break, in the cramped supply room of the clinic. She sat down on a box of gloves, phone in hand, tears silently filling her eyes. Lily came in a minute later, dragging a toy stethoscope. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Grace shook her head. "Sometimes people do brave things, baby," she whispered, "and it makes other people feel less alone." That weekend, Ethan returned to the clinic, not as a guest, but as a volunteer. He took out the trash. He stocked bandages. He even organized the old filing cabinet by hand. "You're alphabetizing things by first name?" Grace teased. "I'm new to small miracles," he said. "Give me time." Then on Sunday, he did something unexpected. He brought them a gift. Not wrapped, not expensive. It was a sketch, a rough drawing on grid paper, a blueprint for a mobile pediatric unit. "It's based on your someday binder," he said. "You saw that?" "I borrowed it from under your bed," he said, a little sheepishly. "Don't worry. I returned the dust bunnies." Grace looked at the paper. It had everything. Scaled compartments for immunizations, fold-out exam stations, solar panel backup for refrigeration, even a small play space up front. At the top, he had written in ink, "Sunvan 1, Winter Pilot Route, Chicago. Gary, South Bend. Toledo." Grace looked up at him, eyes wide. "You're serious?" "I've already started the paperwork. I can fund the first 12 months. Anonymously, if you want. I'd rather it say, Grace Thompson, founder." She shook her head, overwhelmed. This is what I dreamed of before I even knew how to afford groceries." He stepped closer. "Then let's build it together. All three of us." Later that evening, as Lily sat between them, drawing their future on another sheet of paper, Ethan whispered, "I lost a company, but I think I found something better." Grace looked over at him. "What?" "A reason to stay." It was still dark when the van rolled out of the parking lot. The city of Chicago yawned behind them in twinkling silence. Snow clung to street signs and bent tree limbs, and the engine hummed with a kind of hope that didn't need words. Grace sat in the passenger seat, a map folded neatly in her lap. Lily was buckled in the back, wearing her puffy purple coat and eating a granola bar like it was the start of a space mission. And Ethan, for the first time in months, didn't check his phone once. "How long to Gary?" he asked. 2 hours, give or take, Grace replied, depending on traffic and how many times Lily has to pee. "Twice," Lily yelled from the back without looking up. They laughed, and just like that, they were a family on a mission. The van wasn't flashy. It had been a delivery vehicle once. Grace had picked it because it was sturdy, unassuming, and affordable. But inside, it had become something else entirely, a mobile haven of care. Ethan had overseen every detail with precision. Sterile supply drawers, fold-out cots for quick exams, colorful posters hand-drawn by Lily, even a Bluetooth speaker that quietly played soft piano music. On the back wall was a simple sign, "The Sun Van. We see you." Grace had cried the day it was installed. Their first stop was St. Jude's Home for Children, an aging brick building tucked between two warehouses in Gary, Indiana. The director, an older woman named Miss Ramsey, met them at the gate with a clipboard and weary smile. "Most folks send donations," she said. "Not people." "Well," Grace replied gently, "we wanted to meet the faces behind the need." Inside there were 26 children. Ages ranged from 3 to 16. Most were shy. A few had coughs. One little boy had a cast too tight on his arm from a playground fall 2 weeks earlier. And one girl, a wiry 12-year-old named Ava, hadn't spoken in over 4 months. Grace got to work immediately. Vitals, checkups, immunizations. Ethan helped set up charts, wiped surfaces, made silly jokes to lighten the mood. He even let Lily train 2 of the kids to be junior doctors, complete with sticker badges and paper masks. But something shifted when Ava stepped into the van. She didn't sit, didn't speak, just stood by the door, eyes hollow, arms crossed like armor. Grace approached softly. "Hi, Ava. I'm Grace. This is Ethan, and that's Lily. She's the loud one." Lily waved dramatically. Ava didn't move. Grace crouched a little. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to, but we have a stethoscope that glows in the dark." Still no response. Ethan watched, standing just behind Grace. He recognized the look in Ava's eyes, a familiar kind of retreat. He'd seen it in the mirror after Amelia's death, that glazed-over quiet. Not apathy, but survival. He knelt beside her. "You know, I used to think silence meant someone didn't care," he said softly. "But sometimes it just means they cared too much and no one listened." Ava glanced at him, barely. He smiled. "If you want to say nothing, that's okay. But if you want to say one thing, you could whisper it to me, and I'll carry it for you." The silence hung. And then, almost imperceptibly, Ava whispered, "I miss my sister." Ethan nodded. "Me too," he said. "She died in the fire," Ava added, eyes flat. "I was in the closet. I heard her calling me." Ethan didn't blink. "That wasn't your fault." Tears welled up in Ava's eyes, but she didn't cry. She just stepped forward and let Grace listen to her heart. That night, they parked the van beside the orphanage and stayed. Grace took post-shift notes. Ethan cooked pasta from a donated box. Lily fell asleep on Ava's shoulder during a makeshift movie night on Ethan's laptop. Before bed, Grace stepped out into the snowy night and found Ethan sitting on the steps. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Just trying to understand how we let these places disappear from the conversation." She sat beside him, pulling her coat tighter. "We forget because it's easy. Because kids like Ava don't have shareholders. They don't sue. They don't post on social media." He looked at her. "But they remember." She touched his arm. "That's why we show up." Before they left Gary, Ava handed Ethan a note. It was crumpled, written in pencil, barely legible. It said, "Thanks for seeing me." He kept it in his coat pocket for the rest of the journey. It began like most storms do, quietly. One blurry video. A girl in a purple coat laughing as she listened to her heartbeat through a glowing stethoscope. Behind her, a white van with a painted sun on the door. The caption read, "A doctor, a millionaire, and a child, driving hope where it's been forgotten." Within 24 hours, the video had 1.2 million views. By the end of the week, national morning shows were calling it the Sun Van Project, Medicine on Wheels, Hope on 4 Tires. But while the world fell in love with the story, the other world, the world Ethan once ruled, began sharpening its knives. An anonymous op-ed in the Wall Street Journal ran with the headline, "Carter, from visionary to vigilante." The article tore into him. Reckless with investor capital, sentimental to the point of foolishness, undermining the legacy of a billion-dollar foundation by chasing emotional optics. Real change, it concluded, is made in rooms with power, not in vans with stickers. Ethan read it on his phone while refueling the van outside of South Bend. Grace saw the flicker in his face. "What?" she asked. "I just got demoted from visionary to vigilante." He tried to make it a joke, but the weight of the sentence hung in the cold air. By the time they reached Toledo, backlash had escalated. Old board members called him unstable. Former allies leaked internal documents, painted him as someone having a personal breakdown. Analysts accused him of orchestrating a publicity stunt for sympathy or rebranding. Even Harvard Business Review ran a piece titled, "The Myth of the Good CEO, Why Compassion Fails the Market." Grace was furious. How can people mock you for choosing people over profit? Ethan stared out the motel window. "Because they're afraid," he said. "Not of me, of what it means if I'm right." She turned to him. "Then let's keep going." But the worst blow came from someone Ethan had once considered a friend. Samuel Madsen, the new board chair, gave an interview on national television. "We wish Ethan well, but emotional charity isn't a substitute for structural change. He left a seat at the table to drive a van. That's not transformation. That's retreat." Ethan watched the clip in silence. Lily, sitting beside him, asked, "Why's that man mad at you?" He looked at her, this child who still thought love was the highest logic. "Because some people believe helping quietly means you're weak." She frowned. "But you helped me, and you're the strongest person I know." That night, as Ethan sat outside the motel, scrolling through comments, 10,000 voices arguing whether he was a fallen hero or a naive fool, Grace joined him with a letter in her hand. "This came in today," she said. "It was mailed to the clinic in Chicago. No return address." Ethan opened it carefully. It was handwritten, smudged in places, the ink dark, the paper soft from folding. Dear Sunvan, my name is Maria. I live in a shelter in Hammond with my son Elijah. He's 8. He doesn't talk much, and he hasn't been to a doctor in 3 years because we don't have ID or insurance. Last week your van came. You didn't ask for paperwork. You just looked at him and said, "Let's make sure your heart sounds strong." When you left, Elijah told me he wants to be a doctor now. It was the first full sentence he's spoken since our house burned down. Thank you for seeing him. Thank you for making us feel real again. Sincerely, Maria. Just a mom. By the end of the letter, Ethan's hands were shaking. Not from anger, but from something deeper. Recognition. He folded the letter slowly. They can say whatever they want, he whispered. But they weren't there when Elijah spoke. Grace watched him closely. This is why we keep going. The next morning, Grace taped Maria's letter to the inside wall of the van, right beside Ava's crumpled note. She labeled it in careful handwriting. Evidence. Lily added a star sticker beside it. Now it's a real document, she said proudly. Ethan smiled. Maybe someday we'll build a wall full of them. Like a museum? Grace asked. No, he said. Like a courtroom. For anyone who ever said it didn't matter. And so, they kept driving. They stopped in Dayton, then Columbus, then Wheeling. Each city different. Each child unique. Each whisper from a mother, a grandparent, a guardian. A new piece of evidence that quiet kindness moves more than capital ever could. And everywhere they went, the question grew louder. Who are these people? Why are they doing this? And how do we help? The invitation came in a plain white envelope. Ethan almost threw it out, assuming it was another letter from a critic, a court, or a former board member seeking closure he couldn't give. But Grace noticed the return address. Department of Public Health, she said. State level. That's no small envelope. Inside, the letter was simple. We cordially invite Ethan Carter and the founders of the Sunvan Project to speak at the Midwest Health Equity Summit. Theme: Access and Dignity in the Forgotten Places. Date: February 10th. Location: Northwestern University Auditorium, Chicago. Audience: 3,000 health leaders, medical students, community planners, and public officials. At the bottom, a handwritten note. Bring the girl, the one in the purple coat. We think she has something to teach us. Ethan stared at the letter in silence. Grace placed her hand on his. You don't have to prove anything, she said. He looked at her. It's not about proving. It's about presence. The night before the event, they stayed at Ethan's apartment, not because it was grand, but because it was halfway between their last stop and Northwestern. Lily insisted on sleeping on the couch, though Ethan had a full guest room. Couches feel like ships, she said, like you're floating. Ethan tucked a blanket over her and whispered, Tomorrow, we speak to people in suits. Will they be nice? She asked. I don't know, but we'll be honest. The auditorium was massive. Tiered seating, soft spotlights, rows upon rows of suits and scarves and stethoscopes. Ethan wore a plain navy suit. Grace, a soft cream dress and a pin with the Sunvan logo. Lily's crayon sun. But it was Lily who stole the breath of the room. She wore her purple coat, her boots, and a crooked ponytail she insisted on doing herself. They were announced as the Sun Van team, a former CEO, a community nurse, and a girl with a stethoscope. Polite laughter. Ethan approached the podium first. The lights were hot. His hands didn't shake, but his heart pounded. 6 months ago, he began, I was sitting on a 27th floor corner office in downtown Chicago, building strategies on how to maximize impact. And then one night, a little girl asked me if I wanted to have dinner with her and her mommy for Christmas. I said yes, and everything changed. He told the story. Not perfectly, not dramatically, just truly. He talked about Ava, about Maria, about Elijah, about the boardroom he left and the van he found. Grace spoke next. She didn't use notes. We call it the Sun Van not just because of the logo, she said, but because when it shows up, people feel seen, warm, real. She paused. You don't need billion-dollar budgets to bring dignity. You need 3 things: listening, consistency, and love. Then they motioned to Lily. She walked up, not shyly but carefully. Her eyes scanned the room. 3,000 faces, all silent. She took a deep breath. Hi, she said into the mic. My name is Lily. I'm 5.5. Laughter. Soft. Gentle. I used to live in a house that had holes in the roof. Mommy worked a lot. We didn't go to doctors 'cause we couldn't pay. Then Mr. Ethan came. He didn't give us money first. He sat at the table. That's how we knew he was real. Dead silence. I don't know all the big words, but I think people don't need more ideas. They need someone to sit down and eat noodles with them. A few in the audience chuckled, then stopped because tears were rising. Sometimes when kids cry, it's not because they're sad, it's 'cause no one's listening. She looked at her mother, then at Ethan. I'm glad someone listened to us. I think if more people listened, maybe kids wouldn't feel invisible. That's all. Thank you. She walked back to Ethan and took his hand. The room erupted, not in loud applause, but in a slow standing ovation. Not for brilliance, but for truth. Afterward, in the lobby, people didn't ask for business cards. They asked how to donate, how to volunteer, how to build their own versions of the Sun Van, in Detroit, in Des Moines, in El Paso. One med student approached Ethan and whispered, You taught us what textbooks couldn't. That night, back at the apartment, Grace tucked Lily into bed. Ethan sat at the edge of the sofa, staring at a wall he once called success. I think she did more in 3 minutes than I did in 30 years, he said. Grace smiled. You gave her the mic. No, Ethan replied. She took it. I just didn't stop her. It began with Elise, a tired building near the south side of Chicago. Once a forgotten recreation center, abandoned since the early 2000s. The roof leaked. The windows moaned, but the walls were solid. The floor still held. Ethan signed the papers quietly. Grace cried. Lily skipped through the empty halls, yelling, This will be the room for hugs! They called it the Listening House. Not a clinic, not a charity. A home, where health didn't just mean bandages and blood pressure checks, but also stories, soup, and stability. Inside, they built a pediatric exam room with murals of stars and animals, a small kitchen with a community pantry, a reading nook with bean bags and donated books, a room labeled Nap and Talk for single mothers who just needed rest, and one small studio where Grace taught free CPR classes every Saturday. Outside, the Sun van still rolled, but now it had a place to return to. The ribbon cutting wasn't a gala. It was Lily handing a pair of plastic scissors to Ava, who now smiled and ran art workshops for younger kids on Thursdays. "Cut it together," Lily said. "It's our house now." And they did. Weeks turned into seasons. Winter thawed. Spring planted itself gently. Donations trickled in. Not from corporations, but from teachers, sanitation workers, a woman named Maria, who sent $20 with a note that read, "For the next Elijah." Ethan no longer wore suits. He wore jeans and soft t-shirts. He grew a beard. He planted tomatoes with kids behind the clinic and taught Lily how to ride a bike down the block. He still checked the markets, but only on Sundays. He smiled more, and some nights, when the light in the pantry was left on, he'd find Grace there, staring at the shelves. "I just like looking at it full," she said once. He understood. One night, as Lily fell asleep between them after movie night on the couch, Grace whispered, "You built all this." Ethan shook his head. "No. I unbuilt what didn't matter. You built what did." She kissed his hand. "We did it together." And they did. They created a safe space for undocumented mothers to receive care without fear. A mentorship circle for teenage boys whose fathers had vanished. A partnership with local high schools to bring students in for service hours. A lending closet for winter coats. And a mural on the front that read in Lily's handwriting, "You matter, come in." The media forgot them eventually. The debates faded. A new scandal replaced the old. But in that little corner of Chicago, the children remembered. The mothers remembered. The students and janitors and night shift workers remembered. Because when the world stopped looking, the listening house kept listening. Years later, on the 5th anniversary of the clinic, a little boy named Jaden came in. He was 6, big eyes, tiny voice. He brought a piece of paper crumpled in his palm. On it was a drawing, a yellow van, 3 stick figures, and stars all around. Grace asked, "Who are these people, sweetheart?" Jaden pointed. "That's the doctor. That's the man who brings food. That's the girl who sings. They came when my brother was sick." Grace blinked. "Where did they go?" Jaden smiled. "You're here now." Ethan hung the drawing next to Ava's note, Maria's letter, and a dozen other scraps of paper that formed the wall they called legacy. Not fame, not money, just moments that mattered. That night, as the 3 of them sat on the back steps, watching Lily chase fireflies in the grass behind the clinic, Ethan said, "I used to think legacy meant having your name on a building." Grace leaned on his shoulder. "Now? Now I think it means having your heart in one."